Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 17 of our reading of Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous, and we'll probably still be reading Dune Roller by Julian May. But first of all, we're going to go over the copyright information. And it's right here. Chloe says, up here at the top, okay. The author gratefully acknowledges the invaluable assistance of Robert Arthur in the preparation of this volume. This has all the publication. It's published by Dell. This has all the information you could possibly want. All the copyright stuff. All that stuff is really important. And so anyways, it also has all the different printings if you're interested in that kind of thing. Now, I'm going to go over some of the acknowledgments. Again, I won't go over those aloud, but we will just have those on the screen for now. If you want to read them, you can. In the last one, Dr. Thorne has been vanishing in the mornings and stuff. Really weird, and Sapel doesn't really know what's going on. And we're going to find out. We just currently started this page, so... And that, said Sapel, with dark doubt shading his pleasant voice, seems to be all there is to say. The drops glowed on the kitchen table. 7, said Ian Thorne triumphantly. How do they look to you, Willie? From the size of a pea to a tennis ball, 7 little devil eyes. What are you going to do with them? Asked Sapel. He wore an old lab apron over his trousers and wiped the breakfast dishes. It was very early in the morning. Just a little experiment. I got a bright idea the other day while I was visiting Jean. You can have the drops after I finished if you like, but I want to try this thing out first. I wish you'd let me help you. No, Willie. Cunningham believes you too, Sapel went on recklessly. Why don't you tell us what you're going to do? No. He scooped the drops into a bakelite box. I'll be gone most of the day. I have some collecting to do out in the dunes. He vanished into the bedroom and came out wearing hiking boots and a heavy leather jacket. An empty knapsack dangled over his arm. He put the bakelite box into the buckled pouch on the outside of the sack and took a paper packet from the sink and stuffed it into his back pocket. Oops, I almost forgot my collecting bottles. He laughed and went into the radio room. Sapel put down the dish towel and stepped softly after him. There was no collecting bottles in the radio room. He was just in time to see Thorne drop a handful of little metal cylinders into a black 6-inch gadget. Thorne dropped a handful of little metal cylinders and a black 6-inch gadget into the knapsack. Thorne did not seem at all abashed to find Sapel standing there. He brushed past, went out the kitchen door. So long, Willie. Keep the home fires burning. Send out the posse if I'm not back by dark. The screen door slammed. After waiting a minute, Sapel grabbed up the binoculars from the china shelf and glided silently through the sandy yard, past the generator building, to the path that led down the side of the dune to the shed where the Jeep was kept. The early morning mist was still curled around the trees and settled in the hollows, and a distant bird call echoed down on the fourth floor. At a bend in the steep path, Sapel caught a glimpse of Thorne, broad back, dappled by the pale sun, rising through the fog. The path turned sharply and cut off diagonally down the dune toward the shed. Instead of continuing, Sapel stepped off the path and treaded cautiously, circled across through the woods to arrive at a point on the slope directly above the garage. Then he removed his apron, spread it on the twiggy, dew-wet ground, and stretched out among the bushes, bringing his binoculars to bear on the man below. Thorne removed a small wooden crate from the rear of the Jeep. It bore in the red stenciled inscription, G.B. Vander, Vries and Son, Highway Construction. There were other words too, but Thorne stood in the way of Sapel's vision. He quickly transferred the contents of the crate to his knapsack, and with a single look around, he set off down the dune trail that ran through the forest parallel to the lake shore. As soon as Thorne was out of sight, Willie Sapel scrambled heavily to his feet and went back up the path to the lodge. There he addressed some intense words to the microphone of the amateur station and operation, which would to the microphone, the amateur station. Okay. An operation which would have been frowned upon by the FCC, which discourages the use of such equipment for unlicensed persons. He would have maintained his disinterest and scientific detachment if he had been asked about it, but the truth was that Dr. Ian Thorne deeply loved the dunes. He had lived in them during his childhood, grown up and gone away, and come back to find them substantially the same. He recalled that had surprised him a little. You'd expect the dunes to change. They were like a person, though only one who had known the heights of the swamps, the heights and swamps of them, can explain the curious sleeping vitality of the sands under the forest. Things with a smaller life than the dunes would flutter and creep and stalk boldly through them until you might think of them as dead and tame. But Dr. Thorne had seen the traveling dunes shifting restlessly before the wind and felt a kinship with the great never-lasting hills. The path he strolled along was an old friend. He had pursued the invertebrate citizens of the forest along the meandering length, waded in the marshy interdunal pools, which it carefully skirted and had itched from encounters with the poison ivy that festooned the trunks and shrubs beside it. The path wound along the shore for a good 5 miles, horizontally at least, and he did not hurry. The knapsack was too heavy, for one thing, and the still air was warming slowly as the sun rose up through the pines and oak trees. An insect chirped sleepily in a gorge on his right, and as if at some prearranged signal, an excursion of mosquitoes bobbed out to worry the back of his neck. The path took him through a clearing in the sand covered with patches of dusty green grass and scarlet Indian weed. On the lee side of the great bare dune, on the edge of the clearing, stood a single, short cottonwood, half buried in the sand, but the tree had grown upward to escape, modifying its lower branches into roots. The tree was one of the few forms of life that defied the dunes by growing with them, and its branches were brave and green. Thoughtfully, Thorne passed on again into the dimmer depths of the forest. It was nearly noon when he had reached the foot of a cluster of sand dunes, the principal peak of which rose some 150 feet above the floor of the woods. It was the highest point for many miles along the shore, and its name was Mount Scott. The path circled its eastern slope and then continued on, but Thorne stepped off onto the faintly defined spiderweb laced trail leading to the summit. The going was rough. Thorn apple branches probed after his eyes, and as the ascent grew steeper, sudden shifts in the dirty sand under his feet brought him to his knees. The tree roots across the path partially knocked the sand had partially blocked the sand, forming crude natural steps in the lower branches of the dune. But as he climbed higher, the trees were left behind, while the sand grew cleaner and hotter, and the wild grape creeper and ubiquitous poison ivy had become the prevalent greenery. As he was winding and perspiring, he had finally stood on the peak of the dune. He glanced briefly about him, and selected a spot partially shaded by a scrub juniper as his campsite. He sat down, shucked the knapsack and his heavy jacket, and lit a cigarette. The hills below rolled away in gentle green waves toward the farmlands and orchards in the east, and the brilliant blue lakes, and the brilliant blue lake in the west. He could see the spires of the town of Port Grand poking out of the haze a few miles down the shore, and some white sails appeared off the promontory that hid the entrance to the river harbor. He turned his attention to Mount Scott itself. The summit of the dune was really composed of two shallow humps with a depression on the lakeward side, in which Thorne had made his camp. Below this, a sheer, fairly clean slope of sand swept down to the low tangle of woods which lay between him and the shore. He looked cautiously in the knapsack and removed the 7 small drops, grouping them in a circle on the white sand of the lake slope. After that, he retreated to his hollow and settled down as comfortably as he could. The paper packet in his pocket yielded 3 ham and pickle sandwiches, slightly soggy, which he consumed leisurely. A short foray around the peak brought dessert in the form of a handful of late blueberries. After his meal, he employed himself at length with the contents of the knapsack. When the job was finally done, he sat down under the juniper tree and began to wait. The shade of the tree diminished, disappeared as the sun climbed higher, and then reappeared on the other side of the tree, leaving Thorne with the sun in his face and a monumental thirst. The blueberries, unfortunately, were all gone. At last, at 4 p.m., the largest drop began to move. It rolled slowly out of the shallow hole in the sand that cupped it, and moved down the hill. Thorne watched it roll up a small pile of sand that blocked its path and disappear into the woods at the foot of the hill. At 4:57, one of the smaller drops followed in the track of the first. It had a little trouble when it came to the pile of sand, which was one of several strung across the face of the dune, but it negotiated the obstacle at last and disappeared. Just as the sun was beginning to redden the water, the third drop began its descent. Quietly, Thorne rose and replaced it in its hole. The faint gleam within it might have grown a bit brighter when he interfered, but perhaps it was only the reflection of the sun. The 5 remaining drops were grouped in a horseshoe, downward pointing, and the drop whose elopement had just been foiled reposed at the end of one prong. A few minutes later, the larger drop at the other prong attempted to roll down the hill. Thorne put it back and rapped sharply on each of the others with his cigarette lighter, tamping them down further into the sand. He was strained forward alertly now, with his eyes on the strip of forest below. The sun slipped grudgingly behind the flat lake, and a tang of pine washed up the slope. The drops did not move again. With the departure of the sun, the glow in the heart of each alien thing leaped higher and higher until the string of them was like a softly glowing corona in the sand, a strange earthbound constellation. But their glow was not beauty. Thorn reminded himself it was death that dwelled in their great glowing mother, who had already called two of her incredible children home, death that rolled seeking through the lake and the dune forest. His cigarette end made a dimmer eye in the dusk than the glow of the drops. There was still enough light to see by. The sky was red around him, and the dune forest was silent. He wondered idly what long-forgotten power had strewn the drops along the shore. They were not terrestrial. He was almost sure of that. Perhaps they had been a meteor that had exploded over the lake, and the life of the great thing, if it was life, had been patiently gathering up its scattered substance ever since, assimilating the fragments during its long rests at the bottom of the lake. From the size of it, it must have been growing for hundreds of years, collecting a drop for itself here and there, from road beds and sand dunes and farmyards, responding to those who imprudently hindered it with the only defense it knew. And now he was to destroy it. It had killed a man, perhaps before this, perhaps before this even, men had found the drops attractive and carelessly put them in their pockets. And the Dune Roller sought a man. It had killed the little tramp and almost killed Jean. He could not take a chance of letting it go again. The image of Jean rose in his mind, the memory of the time when they had walked down the winding forest path, and of a twig caught in her sandal. She had grains of sand on her tanned arms, and a bright yellow flower stuck crazily in one dark curl. She had laughed when he plumped her down on the moss-soft root of an old oak, and took the twig out. But she had not laughed when he kissed her. Around him, the forest was still. A cold breath whispered along his skin. The forest was still. Not a bird, not an insect, not an animal noise. The forest was still. He felt like yelling at it. Come on out, you. Come on. Come out and chase me like you chased her. He fingered the stud of the small black instrument in his hand. He would show it. Let it dare come out. Let it dare to come out. Come out. It came. He had never dreamed it would be so big. It had made no noise at all. In a fascination of horror, he watched it roll to the foot of the tall dune. It vanished among the trees, but a warm yellow radiance lit the underside of the fluttering leaves as it moved beneath them. The light blazed as it emerged from the brush and came straight towards him, rolling up the hill. The small drops pulsed in their sandy snares, and he gave each one a savage rap, as if it too shared the insult. The great globe flared, then subsided solemnly, but its ponderous ascent was alarmingly rapid. He could not take his eyes away from it. The smaller drops were rocks, were mere bits of oddly glowing crystal. But the great thing before him seemed the most beautiful and most terrible thing he had ever seen in his life. It was, and it was alive. No man could have looked upon it and said it was not alive. The brilliant golden heart in it swelled and blazed upon the golden veins, the golden veining that closed it in. There were noises now from the winding path in the forest below, and the twinkling pinpoint lights of men, but Thorn did not hear them, nor did any light except the great one before him. Oh, yeah, he didn't see any light except for the great one before him. He could not move. Sweat stood out. Oh, we're almost done here. On his face, and the instinct to flee dissolved into terror that folded his legs like boneless things. He half crouched on hands and knees and stared and stared. The thing was closer now, nearly up to the line of sand humps that Thorn had worked so hard on. He had to get away. There was no more time. He forced his paralyzed hands and feet to tear into the loose sand of the side of the depression and pull himself up. He had to get out. He had to get on the other side of the hill. In the last instant, his numb fingers pressed the stud of the little transmitter that would activate the firing caps of the neo-nitro buried in the sand. But the monster must have realized somehow, because he felt when he flung himself out over the peak with the deep red sky around him, a searing, mounting pain that started on the inside and flooded outward. He rolled unconsciously over the far side of the hill just as the 5 solemn detonations blasted the golden, glowing globe to bits. There were white, gauzy circles around the place where his eyes looked out. He was vaguely surprised to see 6 people with their eyes, 3 sets of 2. He made the eyes blink, and the 6 people changed into Sepel, McInes, and Jean. He tried to raise an arm and was rewarded by a fierce jab of pain. The arm was thick and bandaged. He, like the rest of him. The 3 people had seen his eyes open, and they moved closer to him. Jean sat down beside the bed and leaned her head close. I hope that's you in there, she said, and was amazed to see there were tears in her eyes. How am I? He mumbled through the bandages. Medium rare, said Sepel. You doggone crazy fool. We almost got to the top anyways, said McInes gruffly. But you went and beat us to it. Had to, Thorne said painfully. You would, Jean said. Is it gone? He asked. There were 6 people again, and he felt very tired. Shivered to atoms, said Sepel with finality. You should see the crater in the sand, but we'll still have small ones to study. Your ad brought in 4 more today. I was talking to Chemistress on the phone, and he says he's sure he can swing a nice fat reward research grant for us as soon as you're able to get out of that bed. Thorne groaned. He says, Jean translated firmly, that he's sticking to ecological studies of the Michigan Dunes, Chapter 8. No more dune rollers, thank you. McInes laughed and wagged his gray old head. You better surrender, Dr. Sepel. Jean's got her mind made up, and one thing about her, whatever she says, she'll always be right. It's funny because that's her last name. Don't be too sure about that, she said pertly, laying her 2 small hands gently on Thorne's bandaged arm. It didn't hurt a bit. High on a dune above the lake, the moon rode high over the blackened crater in the sand. two of the grains of sand, which gleamed in the moonlight a bit more golden than the rest, tumbled down together into a sheltered hollow to begin anew the work of 300 years. And that was Dune Roller by Julian May. Now we are to No Bath for the Browns by Margot Benet. But I don't know if we have time for this one. This one is really, really a short story, so I kind of want to read it all in one. It's only it's only 3 pages, but I don't think that we have time to read that one. Yeah, we don't. We're going to stop it here for now. We got through Dune Roller, so we're going to end it here. We have been reading Dune Roller by Julian May, but overall we've been reading Alfred Hitchcock Presents stories not for the nervous. And if you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me anyway, or if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.